looking, I see a question here. So Rolanda has a question. I don't want to make this about political points of view, but why does it seem that people with more liberal backgrounds appear to be more focused on addressing racism than those with more conservative perspectives? Ooh, that's a hot one.
Okay, the questions. Okay.
Thank you, Rolanda.
Okay, Rolanda. So I don't think it's political. I think if we look at historical data, people of color, particularly Blacks or African American, have tended to identify more with the liberal viewpoints. And so it makes sense that this group is probably more focused on addressing racism because this is the group that is more negatively impacted by it.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty hot one. When you think about it, it's just, it's who are you around and who are you sharing that information with and what are their perspectives? I mean, a lot of times I think people are just unaware of the problems that may exist, because if you've never been a Black person, or let's take your case, if you've never been a Black woman, there are issues that you deal with every day that people don't know about. And so when they hear about it, they may just think, oh, well, that's not really a thing, right? They may not know it if they're not willing to kind of embrace the learning that's required to truly kind of understand a little bit more. And so I think that's a pretty hot button question.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because in one of our trainings, in the intersectionality training, I take participants through an exercise where we talk about how might other people experience the workplace. So as a Black woman, I know how I experience it, right? But it probably differs for you as a Black man and me as a Black woman. Is going to be different for a white woman. We're both women, but my experience is going to be different than that of a Black woman. I'm sorry, of a white woman. But also think about a cisgendered woman. Think about a transgendered woman. And so when we start to give thought to how people are experiencing the workplace and the lived experiences of others, I think it makes us more empathetic to understand those lived experiences, even though they aren't ours.
Yeah, no, great point. And so I've got a question for you, but I see a question here that I think you'll be able to answer in the context of the next question I'm going to ask you. So let me give you the question that's in the chat. Well, these are smoking hot, but these are real, right? We're not trying to sugarcoat anything here. So the question is, I know this is not about religion, but my white evangelical friends don't really buy into the fact that there is systemic racism. How do I educate them without offending them? And so that kind of fits into a little bit of this question I wanted to ask you is, how might people get comfortable with discussing racism and not sugarcoat?
Okay. Let's start with saying Google is your friend, right? There's a ton of information out there for anyone who wants to learn, tons of data out there. And I'm not sure we can do this work and make everybody comfortable, right? I always say we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's a very sensitive subject, and it will cause everyone to be reflective about their own life, their own journey, and think about how they have treated others, and give thought to things that they may want to do differently. And that's not always easy, and it's not always comfortable. but it's important to do that. And again, I go back to try to be compassionate when you have the conversation. You know, try not to be judgmental and attack the person, because that's going to shut down the conversation. But again, if you approach it from, can I offer you a different perspective? Let me share what I've learned. Have you given thought to this? When I looked up this data, here's what it says. And I'll offer the analogy that I heard a couple of months ago about monopoly, so people can understand systemic racism and that it still exists. If you and I play a game or a round of Monopoly, Cody, but the rules are different for me, okay? You get to purchase property, but I don't, okay? And so we finish the game, and at the end of the game, any money that I've collected from passing go, I have to turn it over to you. And so now we play another round. You get to start out with all of the money from the previous game. I still am not allowed to purchase any property, any railroads. And at the end of that round, again, I have to turn over all of my money to you. So now imagine we play 400 games of Monopoly, and I still am not allowed to buy property. That's the equivalent of 400 plus years of slavery. Wow. So now that I'm able to purchase property, I can't purchase Boardwalk. I can't purchase Park Place. You know, I can only maybe purchase that purple property. What is it, Baltic?
Baltic Avenue or something down there. I know it's not Boardwalk or Park Place.
Right. Maybe I can purchase that, but it's still difficult for me to do that. And even if I have the money to purchase the Boardwalk and the Park Place, you won't allow me. You won't sell it to me, you know. And so, in addition to that, we have there's the discrimination with the housing. You know, we weren't allowed to vote. There were Jim Crow laws. You know, even Black men who went into the military, when they returned, they couldn't take advantage of the GI bills, you know, for education or for housing. And so that's how systemic racism happens. And then when we were finally able again to purchase and build our own communities, you think about what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 with the Tulsa race riots. They burned down the entire community. And that is systemic racism. And even today, you know, there's countless studies out there that say that people are discriminated against because of the sound of their name. If they have a quote unquote Black sounding name, there's studies out there that there's discrimination in housing when people try to rent apartments. And so it does happen. People may not have insight into it because it isn't their lived experience. But again, that doesn't mean that it's not valid and it isn't happening.
Yeah, you make some great points on things that we don't even think about, right? You might have learned it in a history class, or you probably didn't learn it in a history class, depending on where you went to school and what the curriculum was. And the things that you just hit on are things related to power and wealth and policy, and all those things combined, right? You know, wealth is typically inherited, right? You pass the wealth down from generation to generation. So if you didn't start with any wealth, I mean, to your Monopoly example, I think it's a great example. If you didn't start with wealth and there was nothing to pass down, you're always starting at ground zero every time you start. And so that's a perfect example of how if you were to share this with your friends who are not aware of it, and just give them that information, it might not change their mind, but it gives them another point of view to consider and more data to consider as they're trying to get past the the emotional, because this is an emotional topic, right? So if you can get past the emotional engagement that people have and get them to look at the logical and the factual things, then people may find a way to say, you know what, that's not right. I was wrong. I'm willing to start to try to do something about this to a level. And so I really appreciate you sharing those key points. It makes a huge difference.